My name is Luis, a 34-year-old architect from Chicago, who finally saved enough for my dream Alaska wilderness trip after 3 years of planning. I'd mapped out every detail of this $15,000 adventure, from helicopter tours to whale-watching excursions. Then my golden child sister Natalie found out. Within days, my family decided my carefully crafted vacation would be better suited for her and her kids instead. What they didn't know was that I had a secret backup plan all along. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're viewing from. Hit that like button, and subscribe for more stories about finally standing up for yourself. The past 18 months at my architecture firm had been absolutely grueling. I'd been the lead designer on a $40 million commercial development in downtown Chicago, working 60 to 70 hours per week, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and any semblance of a social life. The project had finally wrapped up 2 months ago to great acclaim. My boss even hinted at a partnership track, but the toll on my mental health had been severe. I was burned out, exhausted, and desperately needed a reset. Alaska had been my dream destination since childhood. Growing up in the concrete jungle of Chicago, I'd always been fascinated by untamed wilderness. My apartment walls were covered with photographs of snow-capped mountains, crystal-clear lakes, and the aurora borealis dancing across night skies. I wasn't just a casual admirer. I'd developed a serious passion for wildlife photography, investing thousands in camera equipment that mostly captured city pigeons and the occasional squirrel in the park near my condo. 3 years ago, I'd started planning and saving for what I considered the ultimate adventure, a 14-day Alaskan wilderness experience. This wasn't going to be some typical tourist trip with crowded cruise ships and scheduled photo stops. I'd researched remote locations, spoken with local guides, joined forums of Alaska enthusiasts, and created a custom itinerary that would allow me to experience the true essence of America's last frontier. Every aspect of the trip was meticulously planned. I'd booked a luxury cabin nestled in the mountains near Denali National Park, arranged private helicopter tours to access remote photography locations, reserved a boat for whale watching in Kenai fjords, and even scheduled a float plane excursion to a secluded lake known for its magnificent grizzly population. The cost was steep, $15,000, but I'd been saving $500 from each paycheck, cutting back on dining out, canceling streaming services, and taking on freelance design work on weekends. But this trip represented more than just a vacation. 18 months ago, my 5-year relationship with Vanessa had ended painfully when she decided to pursue her career in Los Angeles. The breakup had left me questioning my priorities and life choices. While I threw myself into work as a distraction, I knew I needed time away to heal and rediscover who I was outside of my career and failed relationship. My itinerary was a perfect balance of adventure and solitude. Days 1 through 3 would be spent in Anchorage, acclimating to the environment, and visiting nearby attractions. Days 4 through 8 would be at the luxury cabin near Denali, with daily excursions into the national park. Days 9 through 11 involved coastal exploration and whale watching around Seward. The final 3 days would be spent in a remote lodge, accessible only by float plane, where I hoped to photograph bears fishing for salmon. Every night before falling asleep, I'd review my Alaska plans, imagining the crisp air filling my lungs, the absolute silence of snow-covered forests, and the thrill of capturing the perfect photograph of a bald eagle in flight. This trip wasn't just a vacation. It was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream and the beginning of my healing journey. As the departure date grew closer, I couldn't contain my excitement. I'd already packed and repacked my gear multiple times, making sure my camera equipment was properly protected, my cold weather clothing was adequate, and I had all necessary supplies. My colleagues noticed the change in my demeanor. I was more upbeat, energetic, and focused, knowing that my reward for all the hard work was just around the corner. Little did I know that sharing my joy with my family would trigger a chain of events that would test our relationships and ultimately change the course of my life. In our family hierarchy, I've always occupied a clear position. The youngest of 3 children, the afterthought, the one expected to sacrifice for the greater family good. My parents, Thomas and Margaret Rodriguez, raised us in a modest suburb outside Chicago, where my father worked as an insurance adjuster, and my mother taught elementary school. On paper, we were a typical middle-class American family, but beneath the surface ran currents of favoritism that shaped all our lives. Natalie, my older sister by 7 years, has always been the undisputed golden child. From her academic achievements in school to her picture-perfect wedding to Kevin at 24, she could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. When she gave birth to Sophia 11 years ago, followed by Ben 9 years ago and Tyler 6 years ago, her position as the family favorite was cemented forever. Every conversation, holiday, and family resource inevitably revolved around Natalie and her children. Between us is Ethan, 4 years my senior, who found the family dynamic so suffocating that he moved to Portland, Oregon, 8 years ago. His communications with the family have dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and the rare visit every couple of years. When I expressed frustration about our family to him once, he simply said, "Save yourself while you can, Luis." I should have left sooner. Natalie embodies entitlement in its purest form. She speaks with the absolute certainty of someone who has never been told no or asked to consider others' needs. When she enters a room, she expects all attention to shift to her immediately. Conversations must center on her challenges, her children's achievements, her needs. She interrupts without hesitation, dismisses others' concerns with a wave of her hand, and has mastered the art of the martyred sigh when she doesn't get her way. The list of sacrifices I've made for Natalie over the years would fill several volumes. When she and Kevin were saving for their house, they lived with our parents for 14 months, during which time I was forced to give up my bedroom whenever I visited, sleeping on an air mattress in the basement while they enjoyed my memory foam mattress and private bathroom. When I pointed out the unfairness, my mother said, "They're a family, Luis. You're just one person." Perhaps the most significant sacrifice came during my college years. I'd been accepted to Cornell's architecture program with a partial scholarship. 2 months before I was set to leave, my parents called a family meeting to explain that they needed to reallocate my college fund to help Natalie and Kevin with their house down payment. "Natalie has a family to think about," my father explained. "You can take out loans, like other students." The result: I attended the state university and graduated with $60,000 in debt that took me 8 years to repay. The pattern continued into our adult lives. I became the default emergency babysitter, often receiving calls at 9 p.m. on Friday nights when their regular sitter canceled. My plans were considered expendable, my time less valuable. "It's different when you have kids," Natalie would explain condescendingly, as if my career and personal life were merely hobbies to be set aside at her convenience. Despite everything, I love my niece and nephews. Sophia is a thoughtful, bookish 11-year-old who reminds me of myself at her age. Ben is a rambunctious 9-year-old sports enthusiast with a surprisingly tender heart. 6-year-old Tyler is still finding his personality, but shows creative promise with his elaborate Lego constructions. When we spend time together without their parents, we have genuine fun building model rockets in the backyard, having movie marathons with homemade popcorn, or taking day trips to the Museum of Science and Industry. The past year has been particularly challenging for Natalie's family. Kevin lost his job as a sales manager for a medical supply company 8 months ago when his division was outsourced. Their financial situation quickly became precarious, with a hefty mortgage, car payments, and private school tuition for Sophia. Though Kevin had received a decent severance package, their savings were rapidly depleting. During this period, I've lent them money 3 times $2,000 for an emergency plumbing disaster, $1,800 for Sophia's school trip and Ben's sports camp, and $1,200 when their car needed major repairs. Each time, the request came with promises of repayment as soon as things turn around, but I've yet to see a single dollar returned. When I gently mentioned the loans during a family dinner, Natalie looked genuinely confused. "But you're single," with no responsibilities, she said. That's what family does. Throughout all of this, I've tried to build my own life and identity separate from my family role as the reliable uncle and perpetual provider. My apartment in downtown Chicago is my sanctuary, decorated with my photography and architectural models. I've cultivated friendships with colleagues and college acquaintances who know nothing of my family dynamics. I date occasionally, though nothing serious has developed since Vanessa, and I've poured myself into my career, finding satisfaction in creating spaces that combine beauty and functionality. But no matter how much distance I create, family gravity always pulls me back into the familiar orbit of expectations and obligations. Every achievement of mine is acknowledged briefly before conversation returns to Natalie's world. Every boundary I attempt to establish is treated as a temporary inconvenience to be overcome. Every assertion of my needs is met with subtle guilt and reminders of family loyalty. As my Alaska trip approached, I knew deep down that sharing my plans with my family was risky, but some naive part of me still hoped for genuine happiness on my behalf, for recognition that I, too, deserved something special. That hope would prove to be my first mistake. Our monthly family dinner always takes place on the last Sunday of each month at my parents' suburban home. The ritual has remained unchanged for years. My mother cooks her signature dishes, usually enchiladas or chile rellenos, in homage to my father's Mexican heritage, while my father grills meat in the backyard regardless of the weather. I arrive first to help set up. Natalie and her family arrive fashionably late, and we all pretend this is the warm, supportive family gathering depicted in television commercials. This particular Sunday in April seemed no different. I arrived at 4:30, helped my mother prepare the salad, and listened to my father's latest complaints about neighborhood property values. Natalie, Kevin, and the kids burst through the door at 5:15, creating their usual whirlwind of noise and chaos. Sophia immediately showed my mother her latest art project. Ben challenged my father to a game of basketball after dinner, and Tyler attached himself to my leg, demanding piggyback rides. Dinner proceeded normally with conversations about the children's activities, Kevin's job search, and neighborhood gossip. As we finished our meal and my mother served her apple pie, there was a natural lull in conversation. Something inside me, perhaps the excitement that had been building for weeks, pushed me to share my news. "I have something to share," I said, trying to keep my voice casual despite my excitement. "I've finalized all the details for my Alaska trip this summer. 2 weeks exploring Denali, Kenai Fjords, and some remote areas. I've been planning it for 3 years, and it's finally happening in July." The table fell silent for a moment. My mother was the first to respond. "Alaska? In July? Isn't that when the mosquitoes are terrible?" She frowned, already finding a flaw in my plans. "I've researched that," I explained. "Where I'm staying and with the right repellent. It shouldn't be an issue. The trade-off is longer daylight hours for photography and better weather for helicopter tours." "Helicopter tours?" My father raised his eyebrows. "That sounds expensive." Before I could respond, Natalie jumped in. "Alaska has always been on my bucket list. Kevin and I talked about going for our honeymoon, but we couldn't afford it." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "How much is this costing you?" The question felt invasive, but in my enthusiasm, I answered honestly. "About 15,000, all in. But I've been saving for 3 years. And it includes some premium experiences like..." "$15,000? Margaret exclaimed. "Luis, that's a down payment on a condo. Or a year of Sophia's private school," Kevin added with a pointed look. I felt my excitement deflating, but pressed on. "It's something I've dreamed about for years. I've worked really hard and saved specifically for this." "It just seems like a lot for one person," Thomas said, his tone deceptively casual. "That cabin you mentioned. How big is it?" 3 bedrooms, I replied, not yet seeing where this was heading. It was actually a better deal than the smaller ones, and the location is perfect for the photography sites I want to visit. Natalie's eyes lit up. 3 bedrooms? So you'll have 2 empty rooms just sitting there? Well, one will be for my gear. But that seems wasteful, my mother interrupted. All that space for just one person. The conversation shifted then, with Natalie asking more detailed questions about the itinerary. What activities had I planned? Were they family-friendly? How close was the cabin to civilization? Each question felt less like interest in my trip and more like an assessment of the vacation's suitability for her family. The children, picking up on the adults' conversation, began to express excitement. Uncle Luis, do they have polar bears there? Ben asked. Can we see glaciers? Sophia chimed in. Are there dogs that pull sleds? Tyler added, bouncing in his seat. Kids, I said gently, this is just my trip. Maybe someday your parents can take you to Alaska too. Kevin leaned forward, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a confidential tone. You know, Luis, if you're worried about traveling alone, we could keep you company. We'd chip in for food and stuff. The offer was so transparent I almost laughed. Chip in would mean covering perhaps 10% of the cost while completely changing the nature of my solo wilderness experience. That's very thoughtful, I replied diplomatically. But this is really a photography-focused trip. Lots of waiting silently for hours to catch wildlife at the right moment. Not very fun for the kids. The kids are very patient, Natalie countered, though all evidence in their daily lives suggested otherwise. And they would love to see Alaska. They've never even been on a real vacation before. That statement was patently false. They had visited Disney World twice and took annual trips to Michigan's lakeshore. But I let it pass. I'm sure they would, I said firmly. But this trip is just for me. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, broken only by the scraping of forks against plates as everyone finished their dessert. I could feel the judgment radiating from my family, the unspoken accusation of selfishness hanging in the air. As I helped clear the dishes, my mother cornered me in the kitchen. Natalie really could use a break, you know. Kevin's job situation has been so stressful for her. I understand that, Mom. But family should help family. She continued as if I hadn't spoken. Your sister has 3 children to think about. I left that evening with a knot in my stomach, the joy of my upcoming adventure already tainted by guilt and resentment. As I drove home, my phone pinged with a text from Natalie. The kids can't stop talking about Alaska now. Thanks for getting their hopes up. I turned off my phone and tried to focus on the road ahead, both literally and figuratively. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of what would become an increasingly uncomfortable situation. The campaign began in earnest the very next morning. My mother called while I was getting ready for work, her voice carrying that particular blend of concern and disappointment she had perfected over the years. I was thinking about your trip, Luis. She began without preamble. You know, Natalie really hasn't had a vacation since Tyler was born. 6 years without a real break. Can you imagine? That was her choice, Mom, I replied, trying to keep frustration from my voice. Lots of people with children take vacations, but they don't have the financial challenges Natalie and Kevin are facing, she countered. This Alaska trip could be exactly what they need to rejuvenate their marriage. Kevin's unemployment has put such a strain on them. I understand that. But this trip is something I've been planning and saving for years. It's important to me. More important than your family's happiness? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper as if she couldn't bear to speak such a thought at normal volume. That question, designed to trigger maximum guilt, haunted me throughout my workday. By evening, my father had joined the pressure campaign with his own phone call. Son, he said, his tone unusually serious. I need to talk to you about this Alaska situation. Your mother and I have been discussing it, and we think the right thing would be for you to let Natalie and her family use your reservation. Dad. Let me finish, he interrupted. You're single. You can travel anytime. Natalie and Kevin have to plan around school schedules and activities. This July window is perfect for them. It's perfect for me too, I countered. That's why I booked it specifically during my project downtime. Luis, he said with a heavy sigh, sometimes being part of a family means making sacrifices. Your mother and I have sacrificed for you kids all our lives. Now it's your turn to think about someone besides yourself. The calls and texts continued relentlessly throughout the week. Natalie sent daily messages about how excited the children were becoming about the Alaska trip, as if it were already decided they would be going. She shared links to articles about family-friendly activities in Alaska, asking which ones I thought the kids would enjoy most. Then the children themselves were enlisted. Sophia called, her 11-year-old voice carefully controlled as she asked if I would help her research Alaskan wildlife for a school project. Ben sent a voice message saying he was practicing hiking on the school track to get ready for the mountains. Tyler, clearly coached, left a voicemail asking if there would be bunk beds at the cabin because Mommy says I can sleep on the top bunk in Alaska. Each interaction turned the knife deeper, making me feel simultaneously manipulated and guilty for not giving in to the manipulation. I began avoiding family calls, letting them go to voicemail and responding with brief texts, citing work busyness. 8 days after the family dinner, Kevin escalated the situation by showing up unannounced at my office during lunch hour. The receptionist called to say someone was waiting for me in the lobby, and I was surprised to find my brother-in-law sitting there, looking uncharacteristically professional, in a button-down shirt. Kevin, I said, genuinely confused. Is everything okay? Are the kids all right? Everything's fine, he assured me quickly. I was in the area for a job interview and thought we could grab lunch. Man to man. The nearby deli was crowded with the lunch rush, providing a buffer of noise for our conversation. Kevin waited until we had ordered and found a table before launching into his prepared speech. Look, Luis, I know this Alaska thing has created some tension, he began, unwrapping his sandwich. But I want you to know that we really appreciate what you're considering doing for us. I'm not considering I started. But he continued as if I hadn't spoken. The timing couldn't be better. The job market is finally looking up. Had a great interview just now, and I think by fall we'll be back on our feet financially. We could pay you back for the trip by Christmas. Guaranteed. Kevin, I said firmly, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not giving up my trip. His expression shifted, the friendly facade slipping momentarily to reveal annoyance. Come on, man. Don't be like that. We're family. Yes, we're family. But that doesn't mean I have to give up something I've been planning for years. But you can go any time, he insisted, echoing my father's argument. You're single. No kids. Flexible schedule. That's not true. I have a demanding career and limited vacation time, just like anyone else. Kevin leaned forward, lowering his voice. Look, between us, Natalie and I are having some difficulties. This trip could really help us reconnect. You know, for the kids' sake. The emotional blackmail was so blatant I almost admired its audacity. I sympathize, Kevin. But my trip isn't the solution to your marital problems. His friendly demeanor vanished entirely. So that's it? You're choosing a solo vacation over helping your sister's family? Real nice, Luis. Real brotherly. The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with Kevin leaving half his sandwich uneaten as he stormed out of the deli. That evening, I met my close friend and colleague Javier for drinks at our usual bar. Javier had been my roommate in college, and now worked at the same architecture firm. As one of the few people who understood both my professional and personal life, his perspective was invaluable. They're manipulating you, he said bluntly, after I recounted the events of the past week. Classic family guilt tactics. I know. I sighed, rotating my beer glass between my palms. But part of me wonders if I am being selfish. $15,000 is a lot for a vacation, just for me. It's your money that you earned and saved, specifically for this purpose. Javier countered. Would anyone call it selfish if you spent that money on a car? Or home renovations? Why is investing in your mental health and fulfilling a dream considered optional? Before I could respond, my phone chimed with an email notification. The subject line made my stomach drop. Alaska reservation. Verification of changes requested. I opened the email to find a message from the booking agency, stating that someone had called attempting to modify my reservation, changing the primary guest name from Luis Martinez to Natalie Harris. The agency was reaching out to verify if this was authorized. What the hell? I showed Javier the email. They're trying to take over my reservation behind my back. How would they even have your booking information? Javier asked, frowning. The realization hit me like a truck. 2 weeks earlier, Natalie had stopped by my apartment, unexpectedly, asking to use my bathroom. She had been alone in my home office for at least 10 minutes, plenty of time to access my computer, where I kept a spreadsheet of all my Alaska booking confirmations. She went through my computer, I said, the violation making my voice shake. My own sister broke into my personal files to steal my vacation. Javier's expression hardened. Luis, this is beyond normal family dynamics. This is toxic and manipulative behavior. You need to put a stop to it now. 3 days later, my parents called a family meeting at their house. I knew what it would be about, but decided to attend anyway, determined to make my position clear once and for all. The ambush was immediate. I walked into the living room to find my parents, Natalie, Kevin, and even the children, all sitting solemnly, as if for an intervention. Luis, my mother began, her voice trembling slightly. We need to discuss this Alaska situation as a family. There's nothing to discuss, I said calmly. It's my trip that I planned and paid for. End of story. That's exactly the kind of selfish attitude we're concerned about, my father interjected. Family means thinking beyond just yourself. I do think beyond myself, I countered. I've helped Natalie and Kevin financially multiple times. I babysit regularly. I show up for every school play, sports game, and birthday. But this trip is for me. Natalie's eyes welled with tears, a performance I'd seen many times before. I can't believe you'd deny my children this opportunity. Just to take pictures of bears. They've never seen mountains or glaciers. Don't you care about creating memories for them? Of course I care about them, I said, looking at my niece and nephews, who appeared confused and uncomfortable. But it's not my responsibility to provide their vacations. No one has ever accused you of taking too much responsibility, Kevin muttered. My mother began to cry in earnest now. I just don't understand when you became so cold, Luis. We raised you to understand the importance of family. This isn't about family, I insisted. It's about respect for boundaries. I've spent 3 years planning this trip. It means a lot to me. Know what means a lot to me? Natalie shot back, making sure my kids have food and a roof over their heads while Kevin looks for work. Some of us have real responsibilities, not just self-indulgent hobbies like photography. The conversation continued in this vein for nearly 2 hours. Every time I made a valid point, someone would shift the goalposts or introduce a new emotional appeal. They questioned my priorities, my character, and ultimately my love for the family. By the time I left, I felt emotionally battered and began to question my own judgment. To make matters worse, I discovered that Natalie had been sharing a one-sided version of the story with extended family members and mutual friends. Cousins I rarely spoke to sent me messages asking why I was being so hard on Natalie during her difficult time. A friend from high school texted asking if everything was okay, saying she'd heard I was going through something that was making me act out of character. The external pressure, combined with the internal guilt, created a perfect storm of emotional turmoil. I began having trouble sleeping, losing focus at work, and questioning whether standing my ground was worth the relational cost. But beneath the guilt and doubt, a spark of anger began to grow, anger at the manipulation, the violation of privacy, the entitlement, and the complete disregard for my feelings and needs. This spark would soon ignite into a flame that would change everything. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after I'd shared my vacation plans with the family, I was in a meeting with clients when my phone began vibrating incessantly in my pocket. Excusing myself briefly, I checked to find 6 notifications from my credit card company about charges being approved. As soon as the meeting ended, I investigated further and felt the blood drain from my face. Someone had used my credit card to purchase 5 airline tickets to Anchorage, Alaska, one for Natalie, one for Kevin, and one for each of the 3 children. The total charge was over $4,000. My hands shaking with rage, I called the credit card company to report the fraudulent charges, then immediately called Natalie. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice cautiously cheerful. "Luis, I was just about to call you. Did you see? How did you get my credit card information?" I demanded, cutting her off. A pause. "What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Natalie. Someone just charged 5 plane tickets to Alaska on my card. The same card I used to book the cabin you tried to hijack last week." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay, look. I can explain. We needed to book the flights before prices went up more, and Kevin's new job doesn't start for another 3 weeks, so we don't have the cash flow right now. We were going to pay you back, of course." "You committed credit card fraud," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "Do you understand that's a crime?" "Don't be so dramatic," she scoffed. "Family members use each other's cards all the time. With permission." "You stole my card details, Natalie. How did you even get them?" She sighed as if I were being unreasonable. "When I helped you move that bookshelf last month, I saw your wallet on the counter while you were in the shower. I took a picture of the card, just in case we ever had an emergency." The casual way she admitted to this violation stunned me into momentary silence. "Luis, are you still there? Look, I know I should have asked first, but I knew you'd say yes anyway. You always help us out." "Not this time," I said firmly. "I've already reported the charges as fraudulent. The airline will cancel those tickets." "You what?" Her voice rose sharply. "Luis, you can't do that. The kids are so excited. We've already told everyone we're going. That's your problem, not mine. And Natalie, stay away from my home, my computer, and my credit cards. I mean it." I ended the call and immediately drove to my parents' house, knowing that Natalie would call them immediately to spin her version of events. When I arrived, my father answered the door with a thunderous expression. "Your sister just called us, hysterical," he said by way of greeting. "What's this about you canceling their tickets? May I come in?" I asked, maintaining my composure. "This concerns all of us." In the living room, my mother sat wringing her hands, her face pale with distress. "Luis, how could you do this to the children? They're devastated." "Let me be very clear," I said, remaining standing to emphasize my point. Natalie stole my credit card information and committed fraud. She also tried to change my cabin reservation without my knowledge or permission. She violated my privacy by going through my computer. These are not the actions of someone who deserves my help. "She made a mistake," my father argued. "People in difficult situations sometimes make poor decisions. This wasn't a mistake," I countered. "It was a deliberate, calculated act of theft." "That's a harsh word to use about your sister," my mother said, flinching. "It's the accurate word. And the fact that neither of you sees anything wrong with her behavior is part of the problem." My father stood, his voice rising. "The problem is your unwillingness to help your family. You've always been selfish, Luis, just like Ethan. At least he had the decency to move away, instead of flaunting his selfishness in our faces. I've helped plenty," I shot back. "I've given Natalie and Kevin nearly $5,000 in the past year alone. I babysit whenever they ask. I'm always there when needed. But this stealing my dream vacation and my credit card crosses every line." "They would have paid you back," my mother insisted weakly. "Like they paid back all the other loans?" I asked. "Not a single dollar has ever been repaid. You're single with no responsibilities," my father said dismissively. Natalie has 3 children to support. Having children doesn't entitle her to steal from me. I was shouting now, years of suppressed frustration finally boiling over. And being single doesn't make my time, money, or dreams less valuable. The argument continued in circles, with my parents defending Natalie's actions or minimizing their severity. It became increasingly clear that nothing I could say would change their perspective. In their eyes, Natalie would always be right, and my needs would always come second. As the argument reached a stalemate, I decided to see exactly how far the deception had progressed. Without warning, I drove to Natalie's house. Her minivan was in the driveway, and through the open garage, I could see suitcases being packed. I knocked sharply on the front door. Kevin answered, his expression changing from surprise to wariness when he saw me. "Luis, now's not a good time." I pushed past him into the house. In the living room, Natalie was sorting through summer clothes, while the children excitedly discussed what they wanted to see in Alaska. "Uncle Luis," Tyler exclaimed, running to hug my legs. "We're going to see bears and whales." The innocent joy on their faces made what I had to do even harder, but I couldn't allow this manipulation to succeed. "Natalie," I said, ignoring her attempts to silence me with pointed looks. "Did you tell your children that I canceled the plane tickets you fraudulently purchased with my stolen credit card information?" The room fell silent. Sophia, the oldest and most perceptive, looked between her mother and me with dawning comprehension. "Kids, go to your rooms," Natalie said quietly. "No," I countered. "They should hear this. They should know that their mother tried to steal my vacation and my money." "You're being cruel," Kevin interjected, stepping toward me threateningly. "I'm being honest," I replied, standing my ground. Something this family could use more of. What followed was the most brutal confrontation of my life. As the children watched in stunned silence, Natalie and I laid bare years of resentment and pain. She accused me of never understanding the sacrifices she'd made as a mother, the pressures she faced, the expectations placed on her as the oldest child. I countered with a lifetime of being treated as an afterthought, having my boundaries violated, and being expected to prioritize her needs above my own. "You've always been jealous of me," she spat, tears streaming down her face. "Jealous that Mom and Dad loved me more." The words hung in the air, shocking in their raw honesty. Even Kevin looked uncomfortable with this admission. "You're right," I said quietly. "They did love you more. They still do. And that's their choice. But here's what you and they need to understand. I'm done being the family doormat. I'm done having my needs considered last. I'm done being taken advantage of." I looked at my niece and nephews, their young faces confused and distressed. "I love you 3 very much," I told them sincerely. "But what your parents tried to do was wrong. Taking things that belong to someone else is wrong, even if that person is family." As I drove home that night, a strange calm settled over me. The confrontation had been painful, but clarifying. For years, I'd allowed my family's expectations to dictate my choices, to make me question my own needs and desires. But no more. At home, I called my friend from college, Dominic Walsh, who had moved to New Zealand 5 years earlier to start an adventure tourism company. We'd kept in touch sporadically over the years, and he had repeatedly invited me to visit. "Dom," I said when he answered, "remember how you've been telling me I should come see New Zealand? Is that offer still open?" "Always, mate," he replied warmly. "What's brought this on?" As I explained the situation with my family and the Alaska trip, a plan began to form in my mind. Perhaps losing this particular dream vacation didn't have to mean losing the chance for adventure and healing altogether. Perhaps it could open the door to something even better. By the time we ended our call 2 hours later, I had a new destination, a new plan, and most importantly, a newfound determination to live life on my own terms, regardless of my family's expectations. The next morning, I began systematically implementing my new plan. My first call was to my bank to report the unauthorized use of my credit card. The representative was sympathetic and efficient, immediately canceling the fraudulent airline charges and issuing me a new card with different numbers to prevent further unauthorized use. "Would you like to file a police report regarding the fraud?" the representative asked. I hesitated, torn between justice and family loyalty. "Not at this time," I finally answered. "But please note in your records that my card information was compromised by a family member." Next, I contacted the Alaska booking agency, explaining that someone had attempted to change my reservation without permission. The agent was understanding and immediately added extra security measures to my booking. "We can require a photo ID matching the reservation name for check-in," she offered. "And I've added notes that any changes must come directly from you, with verification questions." "Thank you," I said. "But actually, I need to make some changes myself." I proceeded to modify my luxury cabin booking, downgrading from the premium 3-bedroom wilderness lodge to their most basic accommodation option, a small 1-bedroom cabin with minimal amenities. I also canceled the private helicopter tours, whale-watching expedition, and float plane excursion, keeping only the most basic package. These changes reduced the cost by nearly 60%, resulting in a substantial refund to my credit card. "Are you sure about these changes, Mr. Martinez?" the agent asked. "The premium experiences you originally booked are often sold out months in advance. You may not be able to rebook them if you change your mind." "I'm sure," I replied confidently. "Plans change." With the Alaska trip significantly downgraded, I turned my attention to creating my actual vacation. I called Dominic in New Zealand, confirming dates that would work with his schedule. I then spent several hours researching flights, eventually booking a ticket from Chicago to Auckland with a brief layover in Los Angeles. The timing was perfect. I would depart 3 days before my family expected me to leave for Alaska. Next came accommodations. Dominic had offered his guest room for part of my stay, but I wanted the freedom to explore independently as well. I booked a series of unique lodgings: 2 nights in a treehouse overlooking a bay, 3 nights in a converted lighthouse on a remote coastline, and 4 nights in a mountainside cabin near a national park known for its spectacular hiking. For activities, I relied on Dominic's expertise in adventure tourism. He helped arrange a private helicopter tour of Milford Sound, a guided multi-day hike on one of New Zealand's famous tracks, a photography expedition with a local wildlife expert, and even a bungee jumping experience that both terrified and exhilarated me just thinking about it. The total cost came to slightly more than my original Alaska plan, but the refund from the downgraded bookings covered most of the difference. I paid the balance with my new credit card, feeling a surge of satisfaction with each confirmation email that arrived in my inbox. At work, I met with my supervisor to adjust my vacation dates, explaining that I needed to depart 3 days earlier than originally planned. Given my recent completion of the major downtown project, he was accommodating. "You deserve this break, Luis," he said. "The New Zealand architecture scene is fascinating. Make sure to check out some of their innovative sustainable building designs while you're there." I hadn't mentioned New Zealand, which confirmed my suspicion that office gossip about my family drama had spread. Rather than being embarrassed, I felt validated that even my professional colleagues understood the situation. With the logistics secured, I turned to preparation. I spent evenings researching New Zealand's geography, climate, and wildlife to maximize my photography opportunities. I ordered specialized equipment: a new telephoto lens for capturing distant wildlife, filters for the unique quality of New Zealand light, and a more rugged camera bag for hiking. Throughout all these preparations, I maintained radio silence with my family. Natalie had sent multiple texts, alternating between anger, guilt-tripping, and attempts at reconciliation. But I responded to none of them. My parents called daily, leaving increasingly concerned voicemails, but I wasn't ready to engage. I needed space to strengthen my resolve and finalize my plans without their influence. Kevin, surprisingly, sent a single text that showed more self-awareness than I'd expected. "I crossed a line. That's on me. We still need to talk about Alaska, but I should have handled it differently. Even this limited acknowledgement was refreshing compared to Natalie's entitled attitude, but it wasn't enough to change my course. 2 weeks after the confrontation, with my New Zealand trip fully planned and my Alaska charade in place, I finally responded to my family's messages with a carefully crafted email addressed to all of them. I've taken time to consider everything that's happened. While I remain deeply hurt by the violation of my privacy and the attempt to take over my vacation, I understand that family is important. The Alaska cabin reservation remains in place, though I've had to make some modifications due to availability changes. I'll share the details closer to the departure date. In the meantime, I need space to process everything. Please respect that. The response was immediate. My phone exploded with calls and messages expressing relief, gratitude, and excitement. But notably, not a single genuine apology. My parents praised my maturity and family-first attitude. Natalie sent a string of heart emojis followed by questions about what to pack. Kevin's message was more measured. Thanks for reconsidering. The kids are thrilled. I responded minimally to these messages, providing just enough engagement to maintain the illusion that I was proceeding with their Alaska plan. When pressed for details about the cabin or activities, I gave vague answers citing changing availability and finalizing details. As my actual departure date approached, I felt a growing sense of liberation. I packed methodically, including clothes suitable for New Zealand's winter, opposite to North American seasons, rather than Alaskan summer. I arranged for my neighbor to collect my mail and water my plants. I completed outstanding work projects and set an out-of-office email response. The night before my departure, I finally allowed myself to fully embrace the excitement of my secret plan. Sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine, I scrolled through images of New Zealand's spectacular landscapes, the snow-capped southern Alps, the otherworldly geothermal areas, the pristine beaches, and ancient forests. This wasn't the Alaska adventure I'd originally dreamed of, but it was becoming something even more meaningful, a declaration of independence. The next morning, I took a taxi to O'Hare International Airport, experiencing an almost giddy sense of freedom. As I checked in for my flight to Auckland via Los Angeles, I sent a final message to my family group chat. Just finished packing for Alaska. Looking forward to the adventure. We'll be largely off-grid due to remote locations, so don't worry if you don't hear from me much. As the plane took off, carrying me thousands of miles away from Chicago and my family's expectations, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself without guilt or apology. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. 26 hours and 2 flights later, I emerged from Auckland International Airport into the crisp New Zealand winter air. Dominic was waiting, his familiar face breaking into a wide grin when he spotted me. "Luis Martinez," he said, pulling me into a bear hug. "You magnificent bastard. I can't believe you actually did it." "Neither can I admitted, the reality of my decision finally sinking in. "Well, welcome to New Zealand," he said, gesturing grandly at the panoramic view of Auckland Harbor visible from the airport road. Land of the long white cloud, hobbits, and people who actually respect boundaries. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Sounds perfect. As we drove toward the city, Dominic filled me in on the plans for the coming days. His enthusiasm infectious. Tomorrow we would explore Auckland, then drive to the treehouse accommodation I'd booked overlooking a secluded bay. "I've got some people I want you to meet," he mentioned casually. "Friends who run a photography tour business. Thought you might enjoy talking shop with them." "Sounds great," I replied, genuinely looking forward to connecting with like-minded people who shared my interests. "One of them, Clara, is particularly interesting," he added with a poorly disguised smirk. "Brilliant photographer. Specializes in wildlife conservation work. She's from California originally, but fell in love with New Zealand 5 years ago and never left." "Are you matchmaking, Dom?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Just creating opportunities," he replied innocently. That's what I do for a living, remember? Adventure opportunities. As we drove along the scenic coastal road, the reality of what I'd done began to fully register. I was on the opposite side of the world from my family, about to experience an adventure they knew nothing about. In 3 days, they would arrive at a basic cabin in Alaska, expecting luxury accommodations and premium experiences that no longer existed. Part of me felt guilty about the disappointment the children would face. Another part felt a strange satisfaction, knowing that Natalie and Kevin would finally experience consequences for their actions. But mostly, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, the peace that comes from reclaiming your life and setting healthy boundaries. Whatever happened with my family in Alaska, whatever fallout awaited me upon my return, this moment was mine. This journey was for me, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt entirely right. 5 days into my New Zealand adventure, the messages began. I was hiking along a coastal trail with Dominic and Clara, the wildlife photographer he'd introduced me to, when my phone suddenly regained signal after hours of blissful disconnection. It immediately buzzed with a barrage of notifications, 17 missed calls, and 32 text messages, all from family members. "Sounds like the Alaska surprise has been discovered," Dominic commented as my phone continued to vibrate persistently. Clara, a tall woman with sun-freckled skin and observant green eyes, looked curiously between us. Over dinner the previous night, I'd shared the full story of my family situation and secret escape plan. Rather than judging me, she'd listened with genuine empathy, occasionally sharing elements of her own complicated family history. "Are you going to answer?" she asked now, her voice free of pressure either way. I took a deep breath of the crisp ocean air. I should at least read the messages. The texts from Natalie progressed from confusion to outrage. "Just arrived at the cabin. There must be some mistake. This isn't what was advertised. Where are the other bedrooms? This is tiny. Called the booking office. They said you changed the reservation. Call me immediately. The helicopter tours are canceled too? What the hell, Luis?" My parents' messages followed a similar pattern, though with more guilt-inducing language. "Your sister is devastated. The children are crying. How could you do this? We raised you better than this, Luis. This cruel joke is beneath you. Whatever issues you have with Natalie, punishing innocent children is unacceptable." Kevin's messages were more direct. "Nice move. Real mature. Hope you're proud of yourself. Natalie hasn't stopped crying. Thanks for ruining the one vacation we might ever be able to afford." Only one message gave me pause from Sophia. "Uncle Luis, Mom and Dad are really mad. Are you okay? Are you really in Alaska too?" With trembling fingers, I decided to respond only to Sophia, keeping it simple. "I'm okay, Soph. Not in Alaska. We'll talk when I get back. Love you." Then, after a moment's consideration, I sent one group message to the adults. "By now you've discovered that the luxury Alaska experience you tried to steal no longer exists. I canceled the premium amenities and accommodation weeks ago. I'm not in Alaska. And I never intended to be." After Natalie stole my credit card information and tried to change my reservation without permission, I realized I needed to establish clear boundaries. I'm currently enjoying a wonderful vacation in a different location. I hope this experience helps you understand that my time, money, and plans deserve the same respect as anyone else's in this family. We can discuss this further when I return." I turned off my phone immediately after sending the message, not ready to face their responses. Clara placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "That took courage," she said quietly. "Doesn't feel like courage," I admitted. "Feels like running away." "Sometimes," Dominic chimed in. "Running away is exactly what you need to do to find your way forward." We continued our hike, the spectacular coastline providing a perfect distraction from family drama. By the time we returned to Clara's Jeep, I felt centered enough to check my phone again. The responses were predictably explosive. Natalie had sent a series of increasingly angry messages, culminating in threats to never let the kids see you again. My parents expressed deep disappointment, questioning how I could abandon family and act so vindictively. Kevin, surprisingly, sent only a brief message. Deserved that. Still a harsh lesson. But it was Sophia's response that truly mattered to me. Are you in New Zealand? Ben saw your Instagram post with a kiwi bird. That's cool. The cabin here is boring. And Mom and Dad keep fighting. I smiled despite the situation. Sophia had always been observant and clever. I hadn't posted anything to social media yet, wanting to maintain my cover. But she'd apparently seen Dominic's photo, where I was tagged in the background. Instead of continuing the text conversation, I decided to do something different. Finding a scenic overlook on our drive back, I asked Clara to take a photo of me with the spectacular New Zealand landscape behind me. I sent it directly to Sophia with a message. Yes, I'm in New Zealand. It's beautiful here. I'm sorry your Alaska trip isn't what everyone expected. Sometimes adults make mistakes and poor choices. I made the choice to come here instead because I needed to stand up for myself. I hope you can understand someday. Keep being your amazing self, Soph. I'll bring you a cool souvenir. The next week passed in a blur of incredible experiences. I hiked through ancient forests, photographed rare birds, kayaked in crystal-clear bays, and even completed the bungee jump that had initially terrified me. Each day brought new adventures and deeper connections, particularly with Clara, whose passion for wildlife conservation and photography matched my own enthusiasm. On our 6th day together, while watching the sunset from a remote beach, Clara asked the question I'd been expecting. What will you do when you go back? About your family, I mean. I tossed a stone into the gentle waves, watching the ripples expand outward. I can't go back to how things were. That version of Luis, the one who always gave in, always put himself last, he doesn't exist anymore. Good, she said firmly. He sounded exhausted. He was, I agreed. But setting boundaries with family is complicated. They've operated under certain expectations for so long. People adapt, Clara said, picking up her own stone to skip across the water's surface. They might not like it at first, but they adapt when they have no choice. Speaking from experience, she nodded. 3 years ago, I told my parents I was staying in New Zealand permanently instead of returning to California to work in my dad's business as expected. They didn't speak to me for 6 months. Now they visit every year and have finally stopped sending me job listings back home. Her story gave me hope. Perhaps with time and consistent boundaries, my family could also adjust to the new normal I intended to establish. 2 weeks after leaving Chicago, I boarded my return flight with mixed emotions. New Zealand had been transformative, I'd experienced adventure, beauty, and even the beginnings of a potential new relationship with Clara, who had promised to visit Chicago in the fall. But returning meant confronting the aftermath of my decision and rebuilding family relationships on new terms. The day after my return, I invited my parents to meet me at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. They arrived looking simultaneously angry and relieved to see me. You look different, my mother said, after an awkward greeting. Tanned. It's winter in New Zealand, I explained, but still plenty of Sunday. The light there is incredible for photography. My father cut to the chase. What you did was deeply hurtful to your sister and her children. They were devastated. What Natalie did was deeply hurtful to me, I countered calmly. She stole my credit card information, tried to take over my reservation without permission, and felt entitled to a vacation I spent years planning and saving for. She made a mistake, my mother insisted. People make mistakes. It wasn't a mistake, I said firmly. It was a deliberate choice, enabled by years of you and Dad treating her needs as more important than mine. My father started to object, but I held up my hand. I'm not here to argue about the past. I'm here to talk about the future. I love you both, and I want a relationship with you. But things need to change. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. I explained how their favoritism had affected me throughout my life, how it had shaped my people-pleasing tendencies, and how the Alaska incident had finally forced me to stand up for myself. They listened with varying degrees of defensiveness and understanding. "We never meant to make you feel less important," my mother said tearfully. "We just thought you were more self-sufficient. Natalie always seemed to need more help." "Because you always gave it to her," I pointed out. "You created a dynamic where she expected to be rescued, and I expected to do the rescuing." By the end of our 3-hour conversation, we hadn't resolved everything, but we'd made a start. My parents agreed to respect my boundaries moving forward, though they clearly still struggled to understand why I couldn't have just shared my vacation. Meeting with Natalie proved more challenging. She refused to see me alone, insisting that Kevin be present, which I accepted. They came to my apartment one evening, the tension palpable as they sat stiffly on my couch. "I want to start by saying I'm sorry for how everything unfolded," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not sorry for protecting myself and my plans, but I regret that the children were caught in the middle." Natalie's expression remained cold. "You humiliated us. Do you know what it was like to arrive at that cabin with 3 excited kids and find a tiny 1-bedroom shack instead of the luxury lodge we expected? To have to tell them all the amazing activities you described were canceled? About as difficult as discovering my sister stole my credit card information and tried to take over my vacation," I replied evenly. Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we crossed a line. I know that. But your response was extreme." "Was it?" I asked. "You committed fraud. In any other context, that would be a criminal offense. My response was to protect myself while allowing you to still have a vacation, just not the premium one you tried to steal." Natalie's facade finally cracked. "I didn't think of it as stealing," she admitted, tears forming. "I just thought, you always help us. You always give in. It didn't seem different from the other times we've needed you." "That's the problem," I said quietly. "You've come to expect access to my resources without consideration for my needs or feelings. That ends now." The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary. I established clear boundaries. No more last-minute babysitting requests. No more financial assistance without formal agreements about repayment. No more expectations that I would sacrifice my plans for theirs. In return, I committed to maintaining a relationship with them and the children, whom I genuinely loved. Kevin, somewhat surprisingly, became an unexpected ally. "She's right, Nat," he said at one point. "We've taken advantage of Luis's generosity. We need to stand on our own feet more." Though Natalie remained somewhat resentful, she eventually acknowledged that her actions had been wrong. "I was desperate for the kids to have a special experience," she explained. "But I shouldn't have gone behind your back." It wasn't a full apology, but it was progress. The children's reactions varied by age. Tyler, at 6, was simply happy to see his uncle again and showed more interest in my stories about New Zealand animals than in the Alaska controversy. Ben, 9, was initially standoffish, having absorbed some of his parents' anger, but warmed up when I showed him photographs of New Zealand's landscapes and promised to teach him photography skills. Sophia, however, surprised me most. When I gave her the carved jade pendant I'd brought back as a souvenir, she looked at me with serious eyes beyond her 11 years. "Mom says you were selfish," she said matter-of-factly. "But Dad told me privately that you were brave to stand up for yourself." I think Dad's right. Her perception brought tears to my eyes. "It's complicated, Soph. Sometimes the brave thing and the hard thing are the same thing." "Will you teach me to be brave too?" she asked. "You already are," I assured her. "But yes, always." In the months that followed, our family dynamics shifted gradually but significantly. Natalie and Kevin found financial counseling, which helped them manage their resources more effectively. My parents made visible efforts to treat us more equally, though old habits occasionally resurfaced. I maintained firm boundaries while remaining engaged with the family, particularly the children. Clara visited in October as promised, bringing her own family complexities and understanding to our developing relationship. Meeting her reinforced my conviction that healthy relationships require mutual respect, something I was finally learning to demand from my family and offer authentically to others. The Alaska dream hasn't disappeared. I've begun planning a new trip for next summer, this time with Clara potentially joining me for part of the adventure. The experience will be different from my original solo vision, but perhaps even better for the growth and changes I've undergone. Looking back on the entire experience, the attempted hijacking, my secret escape, and the painful but necessary confrontations that followed, I recognize it as a turning point in my life. For years, I had confused self-sacrifice with love, martyrdom with family duty. The journey to New Zealand became more than just a vacation. It was a declaration of self-worth, a reclaiming of my right to prioritize my own dreams and needs. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to establish healthy boundaries. And sometimes, finding your voice begins with the simple, powerful word, no. It took me 34 years to truly learn this lesson, but its impact will last a lifetime. Have you ever had to take a stand against family expectations to honor your own needs? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics and personal growth. And if you know someone struggling with family boundaries, sharing this might help them find the courage to stand up for themselves too. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, loving yourself isn't selfish. It's the foundation of every healthy relationship you'll ever have.